you. Just before I start, I think I should let you all know as well, I just signed for the tie, and it smells really good, so there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I am a halfway mark, so hang in there. Yes, so Sherman's just introduced me. My name is Kate. I'm doing my honours year at UNSW, and my research topic focuses on the evolution of Hezbollah in regional politics, as a regional force. Specifically, it's looking at how Hezbollah's militant actions act to complement rather than contradict its political participation in the Lebanese government, and how a balance between the two different modes of conduct can not only be maintained but very, very successful based on or determined by other regional influences. I think it's really important to address straight up the single most significant issue I have found in my research so far, not least because it's so fundamental, and it's this idea or this notion of researchers being ontologically shackled when they approach Hezbollah. So by that, what I mean is that it's necessary to define the organisation in order to place it in its context, and yet there doesn't seem to be a sufficient category of definition to encompass Hezbollah as either an identity or as an organisation. From what I've been exposed to so far, the ontological framework available out there for studies of Hezbollah are limited to terrorism studies or civil society studies, neither of which I believe have the capacity to allow for a true understanding of Hezbollah as both a political and a social force in Middle Eastern politics. I feel like the single-dimension labels, such as terrorist or civil society actor, make it very difficult to grasp the organisation's complexities, and if anything, it leads to an inferior quality of knowledge about the organisation being produced. These labels obviously have a lot of political advantage depending on who's wielding them, but in terms of knowing and understanding and predicting Hezbollah's intentions and actions, they tend to be fairly useless. So, what I'm hoping to attempt with my study is, with my research, is to at least acknowledge, if not in some way mitigate, the obstacles, the ontological obstacles of this kind of framework. To do this, what I've chosen to do is look at the real organisational structures of Hezbollah and their operational choices as a means of understanding the role that they play. My thesis as it stands is that Hezbollah can successfully oscillate between militancy and political pragmatism in pursuit of its goals and its objectives because of the strength of its structures. Related to the structure of the organisation has been the development of an ideological framework that is flexible enough to allow for the specific circumstances of each situation without ever appearing to contradict standard broader ideology. The result has been incredibly successful by any measure of political model, let alone in comparison to other actors in the Lebanese context. So this flexible approach and this ability to employ different means to achieve their goals is central to any understanding of Hezbollah, and more importantly, central to any prediction of their future action. There is this notion of establishing an Islamic order by hand or by mouth, which is to say by persuasion or by force, as dictated by the circumstances at hand. Historically, we've seen that the more favourable the circumstances, the more likely Hezbollah is to resort to militancy and armed jihad to achieve its goals, for example, throughout the period of the 1980s and the 1990s. On the other side, the less favourable the circumstances, the more likely the party to resort to grudgeless pragmatist politics and unarmed means to continue with their objectives. And I think that we're experiencing one of these periods presently and have been doing so since the 2006 war. With a lot of evidence that Hezbollah has become more engaged with the legal mechanisms of the state. If circumstances were to improve significantly for Hezbollah, I think it's fair to predict that militant activity would also increase, and that's obviously very important to anyone studying international relations and international affairs in the region. So essentially my research will critique the division of power amongst different organs of the organisation, and we'll look at how the structure allows for very flexible context-specific decisions to be made by different ranking officials to best suit the circumstances, be they militant or political. It will cover both the militant and social network apparatuses and look briefly at the clerical leadership, body as the single most important factor in balancing the very demanding standards of the ideological abstract with the reality at hand. So in terms of Hezbollah's regional importance, there's another really important and obviously very topical dimension that I hope to address in my research, and that of course is the Hezbollah-Syrian relationship. This relationship tends to be overshadowed by an emphasis in both academic and policy works by the significance of the Iran-Hezbollah relationship, but I think that the Hezbollah-Syrian relation can be far more fruitful and far more revealing of real dynamics in the region than just about any other line of analysis, and for that reason I think it should be explored further. So historically, Syria and Hezbollah have always had a fairly volatile relationship, and one that has always complicated Syrian-Iranian relations. I think that the issue of, for example, the disputed region of the Shavar Farm region demonstrates this point really well. On the one hand, Syria has always and continues to support Hezbollah and other fundamentalist groups in their attempt to oust Western and Israeli influences in Lebanon. But on the other hand, it's not ready to just stand aside and allow Hezbollah's power and influence, as directed by Iran, to grow exponentially in Lebanon. I think Syria sees a critical mass point of power for Hezbollah, and beyond that role, it transforms itself from being a troublesome but still valid ally to an unknown and uncontrollable threat to Syrian interests in the region. There is again a religious dimension to the threat, with the Shia flavour of Hezbollah rule standing in conflict with both the Sunni majority of Syria and the Alawi elite rule of Syria. But I think when it comes down to it, it's fundamentally a question of real politics as opposed to religious tensions. It is interesting to note too that in times of direct negotiations between Syria and Israel, Hezbollah and Syrian-Hezbollah relations are often used as almost like a litmus test of intentions. So direct support of Hezbollah is scaled back by Syria as a sign of goodwill when entering into the negotiations, but it inevitably recommences again once the negotiations fail. In terms of Syrian influence on operational decisions for Hezbollah, the death of the older President Assad, Hafez, in 2002 had a monumental effect on all Lebanese politics. Hafez's rule was such that he exercised a degree of influence in just about every political faction in Lebanon, and his death meant that an obstacle for Hezbollah was removed in terms of its operational choices and its freedom to act. The current Assad, the Bashar, has never been nearly as successful in developing the clout or the influence that his father did to enforce his will or his wishes over Hezbollah, and nor has he been able to significantly block Iranian moves in the Lebanese arena. This failure or absence of influence has been as significant in developments in Hezbollah as the actual presence of Iranian interests in their successes with the organisation. It's very much understandable as following the death of the older Assad, the younger Assad inherited a system that was fragmented and essentially deadlocked, and he has since spent his time and energy looking at keeping his own house, and we're seeing even today the bloody results of this. Significantly, Iran expanded, significantly for Hezbollah and the study of Hezbollah, Iran expanded into a vacuum left by a weakened Syrian interest, and it has been Iran that has decided that Hezbollah should allow to continue with this policy of political pragmatism with great success. So that's where I stand at the moment with my research. It's a bit much, I know, and the more I do, the more I feel like I was down the rabbit hole, but it's very interesting. So, yeah.